Okay, sorry about that, guys. I was like talking to myself for a good 3 minutes there. Hi, everyone. So basically, this is the clicky game. It's a memory game. You play the game by clicking on faces, and you try to click on new faces. When you click on the same face, you lose. So you have to remember which faces you've clicked on and not click on them twice. And as you click more faces, you have to remember more and more faces. Yeah, hopefully this makes sense to everyone. So let's go ahead and take a look at what it's going to take to build this with React. So it says create a new React application using the create React app that we've all been using. That should be pretty simple. We can just edit the source directory of that the same as we've been doing all week. That should be pretty easy, actually. The application should render images of your choice to the screen. Each image should listen for click events. So go find a set of images you like. It could be like from an anime you like or a movie you like or something like that. The application should keep track of the user's score. So it should keep track of the high score and what their current score is. So we can do that, obviously, with the state, as we saw in our click counter example. This will work very similarly, I think, to the click counter examples, which we've already seen. Every time an image is clicked, the images rendered to the page should shuffle themselves in a random order. So we can get into how to implement array.shuffle. There are different ways to do it. The easiest thing for you guys is probably going to be using a library called Lodash that gives you a shuffle method as a just as one of its methods that it gives you, where basically you can take an array and then you just do lodash.shuffle and the name of the array, and it will shuffle it randomly for you. And then number 6, we're going to use the user's score to reset after an incorrect guess. Should the game should restart. So once the user guesses incorrectly, they guess the same person twice, they lose. And so the game restarts, but we keep track of the high score. When complete, the application should be deployed to GitHub Pages. This should be pretty familiar to you guys. There's nothing different about deploying a React app than any other type of Node app, really. Minimum requirements: attempt to complete the homework assignment as described in the instructions. If unable to complete certain portions, please pseudocode these portions. So there is an allowance that you can sort of just pseudocode stuff if you don't get everything to work. Hints: begin by building a non-functional static version of your clicky game, then work on making the game interactive. So we could work on building out the components first. Add it to your portfolio. One more thing: if you have any questions about this project or the material we've covered, please post them in the community channels. All pretty much standard stuff. So let's see what we have to do to build this thing. They give you no boilerplate code to start with. So this is a good article that I wanted to recommend to everybody, which might be a good starting point for talking about this stuff. It's an article from Facebook, I think, called Thinking in Components. This might not be the example I was looking for. I think the one I was looking for was actually from Facebook, from React. So it says React is, in our opinion, the premier way to build big, fast web apps with JavaScript. It has scaled very well for us at Facebook and Instagram. One of the many great parts of React is how it makes you think about apps as you build them. In this document, we'll walk you through the process of building a small searchable database. So this basically shows you how you would break your product, your app that you're building, up into various components comprised of other components, like we talked about the Russian doll analogy. So imagine that we already have a JSON API and a mock-up from our designer. The mock looks like this. So we get a designer that says, hey, I want you to make me this thing, make it look exactly like this. Usually designers will design their stuff a lot prettier than this, but say we get this mock-up, it's going to be a search, and then it's going to show the results of the search. And we're building this out as a component. Then we have a JSON API from our backend that just gives us back JSON. It's just an array of objects. So then we're going to break it into a hierarchy. It says, so it shows us here how we're going to have individual components first for each list item and its price. Then you're going to have a component that holds all of the search results that has name and price as part of it. Then you have another component for the search box, etc. So I'm going to post this in Slack now. Okay. So let's take a look, I guess, at the solved example. That'll probably be a good starting point so you guys can at least see what they did, and then we can kind of go from there. So we'll start with index.js. So of course, points to app.js. App is just a wrapper that points to game in our components directory. So first of all, app is basically just a wrapper that points to game. There's nothing else in wrapper except for the game component. And then we import games from components.game. Again, we're using this directory structure where we have a folder inside the components directory for each component. And then inside each component directory, there's an index.js, and then there's whatever component's name it is, .js. The index.js just links to the component, basically. So this is just a pointer to this. This is just a pointer to this. Hopefully everyone sees how that works. And if this seems confusing, stick with it because it's really not that bad. Each of these has its own CSS file also, which goes in the same folder. This should be the same as some of the examples you guys have seen. The examples did kind of differ between how they set up the component structure hierarchy. Some had this CSS in the JavaScript itself. Some had a JS file for each component in the components directory itself, and it didn't have the individual directories for the components. So it doesn't really matter which way you choose to do it, just kind of pointing that out. So you can see here they break the game up, and we can go back to the page and look at it. They break the game up into a few different components. So this header is going to be a component. This Jumbotron thing, I guess they'll call it a Jumbotron, is going to be a component. Then your grid of images is going to be a component. Then each individual image is going to be a component. And then we have basically the state of this component is going to be the array of images, right? And whatever order they're in. So what you'll do when somebody clicks on a component is you will shuffle the array of images and pass it back to the state, similarly to the examples we saw on Thursday. So let's get into this a little bit deeper here. So here are the components. We have a footer component. We have a header component. Then there's the game component, which is the grid of images as we saw. The container, I guess, kind of holds. Let's see what's inside the container. So the container is just a holder for another component called main, I guess. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's a HTML tag called main. And you were going to give it a class name called container, and then we're going to give it the props.children. So this, I think, is going to be the Jumbotron thing, which I spoke about. And we can see that because we'll see if it's a main tag, which it should be. Oh, no, the main is this thing, because the main part is the game. And then we're just passing in props.children children okay, so game. So let's start out at the beginning. Sorry. We have game, so there are functions to handle correct guess, functions to handle incorrect guess. Very similarly to the way that I coded the hangman example, if you'll remember. We had methods for all of those things, handle this eventuality, handle that eventuality, etc. So for shuffling, they're using this algorithm to shuffle the data. You absolutely are not expected to write this yourself. You can just go Google on Stack Overflow JavaScript shuffle algorithm, and you'll probably find something that looks very similar to this. As an alternative to that, you can go and download the Lodash library or npm install, yarn install, whatever, Lodash, and you can see that Lodash has its own shuffle method. So once you got this shuffle, that's a big part of the problem that you're solving with this game here. Just to show you, this is Lodash. And there's also another library called Underscore that does the same thing. Underscore is a little bit older. People say Lodash is a little bit better. They're very much the same thing. So let's just go and see if we can find shuffle here. So this is how it works. You just go underscore dot shuffle, and then you pass in either the name of the array you want to shuffle, like your array of images, or you can pass it in as the literal if you want to. And that's pretty much how shuffle works. We can try it ourselves in the root eval print loop if we wanted to. I think you guys pretty much would get how that works, but just to show you. If I do shuffle 1, 2, 3, 4, run it again, it shuffles it in a different way. So that is one big part of the problem, but obviously there's still more to do. So you're going to have a handle item click. So this is a lot like when I showed you guys how to code that hangman game. I went through and I figured out what are all the things I'm going to need to do. We're going to need to handle a way to shuffle the data. We're going to need to handle when somebody clicks on something. Either there's going to be a correct guess where they haven't clicked on it before, or they will have already clicked on it before. If they have already clicked on it before, then they lose. So in order to do that, we're going to need to keep track of what images they have already clicked on. And we can do this in the state. So it looks like this is pretty much what they're doing. We have, I mean, obviously their code isn't always the same as my code. They have some weird ES6 stuff in here, deconstructing assignment, etc. But basically, we're going to want to check and see if the image that they clicked is an image that we already clicked. If it is, then they lose. If it isn't, then we add the image that they clicked to a property of the state that's going to hold on to the images that they clicked to keep track of them. So the way they're doing it here, it's getting the state of the data, which is the current array of images, shuffled the way that it's shuffled. And then we're saying for each item, we're going to have the new item equal all of the properties of that item. We're using deconstructing assignment to construct this into a new array. And then we're saying if the new item.id equals the ID, which we're passing into the handle click item. So I guess we're getting an ID of an image. When we bind that click event, we can see we're binding the click event down here in the template, in the JSX template. Yeah, we're passing in the handle click here to the click item, and then the click item obviously is a separate component that's a subdivision of this. We're using this state.data.map to loop over each of the images in our array and then put a new click item component for each of the images in our array. So here's the click item components. And then here we're setting the onClick to an arrow function, which equals the handle click and the ID of this image. So basically, we're calling the handle click method that we define up here in our game, or is it our container? No, it's our game component. So we have this handle click item method that applies to all of the individual click items. So we define it up here because it applies to all of them. Remember, we define the methods in the outermost component if they apply to all of the components, and then we pass it down to the individual click item component. We've covered a lot, so any questions on anything so far? Anyone at all? Are you guys there? Okay, I'll just keep going if no one has any questions then. Are you guys? I guess you guys are understanding that, so that's good. Okay, so we'll keep going. So this is basically the meat and potatoes of how this is working. We have this game component. This is the main thing that you guys are going to build. If you don't have a header and a footer, it doesn't really matter. It's not required. The main thing is that you guys build this in here, the game component, where you can click on an image, they shuffle, you click on another image, you click on the image twice, and you lose. And it shakes nicely like that. So maybe you can figure out some nice way to animate it and make it shake. If not, it can play a sound. You can make it do whatever you want it to. So we're defining, as I was saying, we're defining this handle click item method out here in the container component, in the game component, which is a container for the individual click items. We're going to loop over all of the click items in this state. Again, we're setting the state of the component to equal the array of images. Then we're going to loop over all of the images in the state data, and we're going to put a new click item for each of them. We're going to do this using this .stateData.map, the same way that we saw in our example on Saturday. Again, we use the curly brackets to denote JavaScript inside of JSX, and then we use the parentheses to denote JSX inside of JavaScript. We can go as many levels deep as we want to. This is how we iterate over items in JSON data or JavaScript arrays, and then make a UI component for each one of them. Very similarly to what we saw with like the GIF homework and lots of other homeworks you guys have had. So basically, we're generating the game component here. This is the container for all of the original components. We're also going to define a nav component, which will have the high score and then the current score. So you'll be keeping track of those, and you'll keep track of, is there any, so we also in here, we also have a method to reset it, because you have to think we're going to need to reset it as well. We're going to need to handle an incorrect guess, so we're going to need to reset everything when we guess incorrectly. Also, you might want to play a sound or something like that. And then there's also a reset data method, which maybe it inherits, I guess, from the prototype from React. We're going to have a did component mount method. You guys should have this in your examples, so you can just pretty much copy it. That's just boilerplate code. That'll set the state to something if it doesn't mount properly. And then this just makes sure that we're shuffling the data every time. So you guys will use this component did mount method to shuffle the data when it shows it every time. And this is the trick to getting it to shuffle. When you show it every time, just do this little thing right here. Have your component did mount method declared like this, just in this new shorthand ES60 method, and then use the this.setState method to set the data property of the state to be the shuffled data, whether you use underscore to shuffle or you use your own shuffle method. If you are using underscore and you had included underscore, if you import or require underscore up here and you had npm installed underscore, then you could just do it like that, underscore.shuffle as well. So this component did mount method declared like this, and this new shorthand ES6 way is the trick to getting the data state of the component to shuffle every time. Here we're just setting the initial state. The data is going to equal the data, so we could also put it like this if we don't want to be ES6 and weird about stuff. We're importing the data from an original data.json file, which has all of our images as an array. So this is 2 directories back. I guess it's in, yeah, public. Oh, no, it's here. Sorry. So this is just an array of image objects. Each image object has an ID. Then it has this. Then it's going to be clicked as true or false. So this is how we're keeping track of it. When I was sort of reverse engineering in my head, I was thinking they would do it in a sort of different way where we would keep track of an array of all of the images that were already clicked, and then we could just have it keyed on the images themselves. But it doesn't matter. You can do it this way too. This is actually a little bit more of a precise way to do it. So here you go. This is what our initial data should look like. It's an array of objects. Each object has an ID. Each object has the URL for the image, and each object has whether or not the image has been clicked yet. So we're going to set this as the state for our component. If you guys remember how state works, this will be the initial state. Then every time the component reloads, it's going to shuffle the images. Let me go back to here. So every time the component loads, we're going to shuffle the images. When we click on an item, we're going to call guest. We're going to set guest correctly equals true. And when we map over the items, sorry, let me do this. Maps on new data. So basically, we're passing in the ID of the component that got clicked, or the image that got clicked. We are going to be setting the new data to the state data map. So the data state map is going to be the same as the JSON we saw right here. It's going to be this data, but shuffled in some weird way. We're going to take that, we're going to map over it here. So we're going to take that array of objects. We're going to apply the map method to it. Map, of course, takes as an argument a function. In this case, we're doing a fat arrow function. They're doing a const. You don't really have to do it that way. It doesn't really matter, but whatever. So they're doing const to be fancy and ES6-like. We're saying new item equals this spread assignment thing they have of their item. Which means, let's just see what this spread assignment does in the browser. So let's say we have, just to show you guys and me, because I don't really even understand this stuff. Okay. Okay, so here's why they're doing it that way. And this is a very confusing way to show you guys in the example. So the reason they're using this spread operator is because they want to make a copy of it. Usually if you just set a variable to equal another variable to it, it will be a reference to it and not another copy. And we can take a look at what that means in a second, but I just want you all to bear with me. So we're using this spread operator to create a copy of just whatever item we're on. Whatever item we're on is going to be this thing right here. It's going to be this object that has the ID, the image URL, and whether or not it's been clicked. Those three pieces of information. Using the spread operator just makes a clean copy of it instead of setting a reference to it as it normally would. Then we're going to say if the new item's ID and the ID that we passed in when we clicked on the object are the same, then we know that they guessed correctly. If that item's ID and the item's ID they passed in are the same, and if, see, this is bad coding because right here, these two things could have been one if statement. This could have been all put together in here like this, which makes it much less confusing. So sometimes we run into these little things with the examples, as you guys have seen, but whatever. So we could just change that to that, make it less confusing. So we're saying if the new item's ID equals the ID that gets passed in when we click on the image, so whatever image got clicked's ID, then we're going to make this item got clicked equals true. So we're going to set its clicked state to true, and we're going to set guessed correctly as true, and then return the new item. So we're making a new data with new copies of the new item. Then if guessed correctly is true at the, so we're declaring guessed correctly as false up here. They did this in a really bad way. Sorry, everyone. Okay, so what they're saying is we're going to set a guessed correctly variable up here to false. We're going to make a new const down here, which is going to be a copy of the state data that's already there, the array of objects for each image that has the ID, the source, and whether or not it's been clicked in as the three properties. When we map it, we're going to set a new variable to equal a copy of the item. So there's absolutely no reason they need to be making this copy and using the spread operator. I guess they just wanted to show that they could be ES6E and fancy, but I will show you guys what this does in a minute just so you'll understand. But there's no reason they need to use that here. Then we're saying we're looping over all of the images that you're showing on your page. Then we're going to say that if the image was clicked, we're going to set it to true, and we're going to set guessed correctly to true. So if the image that we found has the right ID, then we're going to set guessed correctly to true, and we're going to set the clicked property of that image also to true. We're going to return the new item, so it gets put in the new array of items we're declaring as this const new data here. And then at the bottom, we're saying if guessed correctly is true, then call this.handle correct guess. So we're going to update the score, say they got one more point, and we're going to shuffle the data and reset the components. Otherwise, we're going to do the handle incorrect guess. And there we reset the data and set the score to 0 with this set state method up here. So what I'm still trying to figure out, if guessed correctly is true, guessed correctly stays true throughout. I don't know. They did this in a weird way. You guys will have to figure out how to write this handle item click function. It shouldn't be hard for you, hopefully, to figure it out. The way I would do it is something like this. When an item gets clicked, we get an ID passed into us for what that item's ID was. then we can just take it and say, so we could find it, in fact, in the array. So that would be the easiest thing to do. I think to do this dot state dot data dot find or dot filter. Dot find just gets 1, so that's better. But you can use dot filter too. Doesn't matter. So we're just going to filter it and try to see if there are any that match this ID that have a clicked true already set. So we're just passing in a fat arrow function as the only argument here to filter. And then we're just going to say it's going to return true if both the item sorry, I just lost my train of thought. So the two things we want to find out are if the item's ID matches the ID we're passing in from the clicked component, and we want to see if the item dot clicked equals true. So if both these two things are true, then we know that this person just lost the game. Making sure I have all my parentheses, which I did. So we're going to say results. Let's call this, for lack of a better name. This can be a const. And then, so all of this we shouldn't really need. I'll even comment it out. This is just to show you guys the solution in sort of a cleaner way. So now we have a result, which is all of the items in the state that both have their click state set to true and have the ID of the item that was just clicked on. So if the length of this is greater than 0, then we're going to know they just lost the game. Everybody see how that works? Questions so far? Mappy has a question mark, but no question. Okay. Oh, good. Melvin's typing. Okay, we'll see what Mario says and then recap. You guys have the link in your homework, Mario, to this. So you guys have this link. You can use this as boilerplate code. You can even do inspect element and go copy their HTML and use that as the basis for coding your JSX templates. So let me reiterate here, thinking in React. This is a great article to read. This will help you guys out a lot. But basically, you want to think about things in this way, right? We want to think about what are our components and what are the components that are going to go inside it. And then we want to think, what are the properties we're going to pass them and what are the states going to be? We need to think about those 5 things. What are my components going to be? How are they going to be structured? Which components go inside which components? Those are things 1 and 2. Thing 3 is you have to think, what is the state going to be? And then you have to think, what are the properties of each component going to be? And then lastly, you have to think, what properties are you going to pass from component to component? So this seems like a lot to think about, but it's not really when you see it in practice, and it makes a lot more sense than the weird kinds of constructions that we come up with to get our front-end jQuery apps to work, which you guys have already gotten your hands really dirty with all of your projects and stuff you've been doing. So let's reiterate and take a look again at how this is structured. Basically, you have inside your components, you have your click item. Again, the click item is the individual image container. All it really does is show the image tag inside a div. That's all there is to it. It's also, you're going to put the click event. We do this by calling the props.handleClick, which we're passing in from the parent component, and then we pass the ID of this component. So really not that confusing. It seems kind of confusing, but when you look at the examples you guys have from activities and stuff, you should be able to piece it together pretty easily. We're, instead of using an image tag, we're setting the background image, in this case, of a div to equal the image. So that's one way to do it. You could also just put it in here as the image tag. That's also perfectly acceptable. We're giving it a class, and then we can make it shake. The shake, it looks like they're doing as a CSS class to animate it as a CSS3 animation. So we can take a look at, I guess we don't have to take a look at how they did that. You guys can have fun with doing the wrong guess however you want it to. You could have it make a funny noise. You could make the page light up. You could make it do whatever you want it to. But basically, we just have a class name here. And if the properties are shake, then we're going to add a class of shake to it, which is what makes it shake using CSS3 animations. And let's try and see how they're setting that property of shake. So here, when they're calling the components, remember, we're iterating over all of the state.data. The state.data is the array of images with their ID, their URL, and their state, whether or not they've been clicked. So then this click item takes a few different properties. It takes the key, which is the ID of the individual image. Remember, we're iterating over this array of image objects. We just get the ID property, pass that in as the key property to the image item. Also, we're setting another property called ID to the same thing. That doesn't really seem necessary, but that's just how they're doing it here. Then we're saying if there is a score, then we're going to set shake to, if there is a score and there is a top score, then we're going to tell it to shake. So we don't want it to shake the first time. They have kind of a weird logic of doing this. This assumes that we will have already set the score back to 0, or if not, it won't do it. I don't know why it's setting all of them to be shake. So I guess here's why. They shake every time we reset the board. That part, I don't know. You guys will have to figure out how to get it to shake or show something when you lose. Another way that would probably be easier than this shake thing they did, which I think they found a weird kind of logic that makes this work, which I wouldn't really recommend using. It isn't a good way to do things. So another way to do this is just when you handle incorrect guess, you could put your sound effect or whatever in here, do the play sound and play a sound, or have it add a class to the body, or do something. So you could have your logic for how you indicate the loss, the incorrect guess, go inside this handle incorrect guess function as well. Okay, let me get to some questions. In reference to thinking in React, we start from the smallest innermost component, most Russian nesting doll. That's a great question, Melvin. I haven't really read the whole article, or at least not in a long time, so I don't really know. I think you can do it whichever way makes sense to you is probably fine. But yeah, you do want to think about what your innermost nesting components are going to be. I think that's a smart question, and you answered it correctly. You want to start from here. Okay, this is going to be one component. This is like an atomic sort of thing. In computer programming, we had this idea of things being atomic, where when you break them down any smaller than that, then things start to get really weird. So basically, this is something that can't be broken down any smaller, this one list item here, and then from out there, we can make another component around that. So yeah, I think that is a good way to think about it, Melvin, starting from the inside of the Russian dolls. In answer to your question, Lauren, also animate.css, pop motion for Shake, a few others. Yeah, so there are, of course, a bunch of things out there to do Shake. You can go Google how to make web page Shake, and I'm sure you'll find a lot of stuff. And then you're saying maybe because it will animate once you get them to remove the class to get it to Shake again. Yeah, so maybe they're removing the Shake class and adding it. That definitely could be. Definitely. That does make sense, but they didn't do it in a way that was really nice and friendly for the developer coming in behind them or for the students coming in behind them. Any other questions, everyone? No problem, Melvin. Okay, so hopefully you guys sort of have a better idea now. We can take a look at the nav message component too. So this is just another component you're going to have that is a child of the game component. And this nav component basically shows the score and the top score. So again, you're setting the state here. We set the state of this to be the data, the score, and the top score. So then you just pass in those 2 bits of information, the score and the top score, to the score and top score properties of the nav score components. Hope everybody sees how that works. And then you just show them in your nav score component. So the state of the nav score component gets nicely set to whatever the score actually is, which actually pretty nicely demonstrates why it's good to be using React and state and all of this. Because when we build a game like this, it automatically keeps track of the state. It keeps track of whether or not the images have been clicked, and it keeps track of what the right score is. If we tried to do this with jQuery or with plain JavaScript or another type of way, like you guys did the Hangman game at the beginning, it would be really, really hard to manage. And in fact, it might be interesting to try to build a Hangman game with React. Maybe they figured that would be a little bit too advanced, and that's why they didn't do that. But I think that might be interesting. But yeah, the way this is set up and the way this works does do a good job showing basically why React is valuable, because it does manage the state. So we're able to do a lot more with a lot less. If you think this is confusing, I think you'd be a lot more confused at sort of how to manage to finagle all of this to work with jQuery. Let's see, is there anything else that needs to be explained? The header is more or less a static component. It doesn't have any state or anything of its own, so they're not even using a component class for this. They're just using a render method. I don't have the nice JSX thing I have on my laptop for coloring in the JSX code the right way in the text editor. The footer, again, it's just a footer, just a static component. So you can make your static components like this with just the render function and nothing else. Basically use the code that you've seen in the examples from this week as boilerplate. That should get you started, and you can basically just kind of Frankenstein it together from there. Shouldn't be that hard. Use this video as a guide so you can see how everything is sort of put together and how everything works. Again, to show the structure of this, everything, of course, starts with the index.js. Index.js points to the app.js. The app.js just includes the game.js. We're using import to import all of these things, very similar to the homework and all the stuff we've seen this week. Inside game.js, which we've been going over, is all this stuff we've seen here. Again, first you're going to import React. We're importing component from React the way we saw in our Saturday example. We're going to import all of the components we're using, which are nav, header. These are both just little static components. Although the nav is not static, I'm sorry, because it keeps track of the state for the scores. You have header, you have the container, then there's the click item, which is the actual image itself that gets clicked on. Then there's the footer. Then we're also including the data to start with from our data.json file. Then we're, of course, declaring this component as a class, not just as a render method. The first thing that we're going to set is the state. We set the state like this with one of these ES6 property things. We then call this component didMount method like this, the same way as we call the render method, just in this very simple ES6 way. Then inside this component didMount method, we're going to call the this.setState method. And we're going to pass it some new data. The data that we're going to be setting is the shuffled version of the current this.state.data. So we're basically taking the current data and shuffling it. And that's how we get it to shuffle every time with this component didMount method with the this.setState method inside it where we shuffle the data. Then we have a method to handle the correct guess. We have a method to handle the incorrect guess. We have a method to reset the data. And inside of here, we're doing data.map. So we pass in the data. We make a copy of the item. So basically all we're doing here was we're setting the clicked property to false on all of the image objects. That's basically all they're doing here. Then we're going to have our shuffle method as we talked about. You could choose to use Lodash or underscore for that instead. Then you have this handle click item method, which we talked about, which we're passing into the individual click item through the property here, the handle click property. Then we're going to call it from the click item method itself. This is, again, the part that gets a little tricky, so I'm going to show it to you guys again. From inside our click item here, we're passing in the method, the handle click method, as a part of the state. We pass it in with the props. This is not declared as a class. This is just a render function because it's pretty much static and all it has is state, but it doesn't have any methods or business logic that's encapsulated inside it like the game component does. So we can make this pretty much static and just have a render method, not have a class. And then for the onClick, we pass in an arrow function here like this, and we're just going to call this handle click method we passed in, and then we're going to pass it the props.id, the ID of this particular image that we decided to click on. So that's how that works. And inside this function, as I showed you guys, I wrote it in a little bit what I think is a slightly cleaner way than what they did. We don't even need this guessed correctly false part here. We're just going to get, what we want to see is we have two pieces of information to start with this method. We have the ID that's being passed in, the ID of the image that was just clicked on, and then we have the state of our component, which is all the images. So what we want to find out is the ID that we just clicked on equal to the ID in one of the image objects that has a click property set to true? So that's how we figure out, is the image already clicked on? If it has been already clicked on, the clicked property in the data object will be set to true. So we just say, hey, is there an object in this array of objects that has the same ID as the ID we're passing in here from the image that just got clicked, and already has its click property set to true? If that is a thing, if there is at least one object in that array of objects that matches those criteria, then we're going to actually go ahead and handle the incorrect guess. Then we know we lose. Otherwise, we know they were correct because that image had not been clicked on yet. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone, how I did that. Does that part make sense to you guys, everyone? Okay, let me answer these questions. Yeah, thanks, Mario. Yeah, Gretel, you got it. These are arrow functions. They're sort of the same, but sort of different. When arrow functions were added to ES6, it was to match a feature other languages had implemented, which is something called a lambda, which comes from calculus, which is basically just a function that you can pass around similarly to the way everything, pretty much the way Lisp works is with lambdas. There's lambdas being passed into lambdas, which is why it's functional. So then JavaScript added lambdas too, which are basically function expressions. So that's what that is. I don't want to confuse you guys too much. Yes, Frankenstein and your head spinning. I use the Frankenstein analogy too. So hopefully this gives you guys a good starting point. Any other questions before we break? Okay, well, we're going to break. You guys can feel free to Slack me individually. Okay, so the GitHub pages will know which index.html to show. It'll know, because here's how it works, Mario. Your public directory, and you guys may have to do a little bit of finagling to get your React apps to work in GitHub pages, so talk to me or Jonathan Morales if you have any problems with it. But basically, it should be as simple as you have your public directory. Your public directory has the index.html. This has the div with the root ID, so this is what React uses to build everything from there. Then React, when it runs, so there's two different ways your React app can run. It can run in the development environment or the production environment. This is different than the regular way in our Node apps, where you guys might have looked at the different environments where the logging is just different. With this, the way it runs the app is different. So you notice that everything's slow when we're running our development environment. That's because it basically figures out what to do with everything each time. When you run it in the production environment, it compiles everything, it shrinks it down, it makes it into a way where it can run really, really fast, and it's all optimized. And Heroku should handle all of this stuff for you with the way that it comes set up in the Create React App bundle. There shouldn't be any special instructions you guys have to do. But when you get it working, when you get to that point, try it out, and it should be as simple as doing a regular Heroku deploy. And if not, we can address that. Yeah, so there's a build and a public because of the way the dev server works. So the public is really all you have to worry about, but it should basically handle it behind the scenes on Heroku anyway. Let's go ahead and Google that now since we have a few more minutes. Here we go. Okay, so this guy is trying to do it. This might not be a good one. So here's a good article from Heroku. So Heroku has some pretty good documentation to help you guys out with this stuff. New zero configure. Yeah, so it looks like Heroku designed their inner workings to work with the inner workings of Create React App. So it all kind of just works together nicely behind the scenes. And hopefully you guys shouldn't run into any problems. But if you do, reach out to me, reach out to Jonathan Morales. We'll get you straightened out. Okay, if that's it, there's no other questions. And we can wrap this up. Thanks, guys.